I'm Nancy Varvel. I'm the chair of the Fayetteville Tree and Landscape Advisory Committee. And we're the outfit that's putting this on. There are some other members of the committee here tonight, and I wanted you to meet them as well. They've helped make all this happen. And one of them is our speaker tonight, Cindi Cope. She's been chair of this committee for 2 terms before I became chair just lately. And 2 people at the back of the room that checked you in. There's Betty Martin and Lois Luzaric. They're on the committee, and we'll have a little bit more to say about that committee in a second. One of the duties of the committee is to organize and administer an ongoing program of public education that's straight from the City Fayetteville Code. And so tonight's program and several others that I'm going to tell you about are part of this public education effort. In Fayetteville, we've been foresighted enough to set aside several chunks of land for preservation of natural habitat, but my personal vision is that in addition to these preserves, that we all, anybody that wants to take the energy and time, learn to keep our own properties in a natural state so that we'll have a lot more native habitat for animals and birds, and makes it more enjoyable for us all to live here. So most of our educational efforts have been along the line of educating ourselves on how to do this. The first program we had in our series was in February, and Professor Don Steinkraus told us and showed us the effect of non-native plants on birds and insects. And tonight's presentation is going to be on Ozark native landscapes, why biodiversity is important, and that takes us deeper into the subject of how to use plants to support native birds and insects. I wanted to tell you some more about our next couple of events, just so you'll know, kind of keep them in your head in case that's something you want to watch for and attend. Our next event is on April 7th at 5:30 at the bottom of the Frisco Trail, just north of Greenhouse Grill along Prairies where one would park. And that's going to be identifying and removing invasive plants, and identifying and removing, and then we'll be replacing those with native plants. And we'll be looking at lots of samples, and hope you bring some samples of invasive plants that you'd like to know what they are, or show somebody else what they are, so they'll be on the lookout for them. And we're going to learn several methods of removing them, including something called a weed wrench, which a couple of us have ordered to see if they work, and if they work, we hope they spread all over town. It's a great big old thing with a lever and a clamp at the bottom, and you clamp up to 2 inches. You can clamp it around the base of a weed, like a bush honeysuckle, and pull down on that lever, and it should come right out. A big one, a 2-inch one. So if those things work, we would like to, people that want to order them could, but we might make a stable of them somewhere where people can borrow them or check them out and take them home and pull out whatever they want to pull out at their properties. So that's something to come and see. We hope people will come and participate that day, or if they don't want to participate in helping remove those invasive plants, that they'll come and learn how to and observe and go home inspired to do some of that on anywhere they want to do it, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, there'll be more announcements about that, and we will notify you about that if you're interested in attending that. And then in May, we plan to have a landscaping with native plants on-site workshop at a person's home here in Fayetteville. We haven't planned that exactly yet, but we'll get that information out soon. And in the fall, we definitely are planning a workshop on how to care for trees and plant them properly. And I wanted to say a couple of things. Oh yes, one of them is that we need another committee member. There are 7 of us and the slots for 8. And so we're recruiting anybody that would be interested in being on the Tree and Landscape Advisory Board. There's 1 committee slot empty, and we would love to have a little more help with these projects or ideas for other things that we might do. And to become a committee member, you would, our meetings are, by the way, the 2nd Wednesday of every month at 4 o'clock, so it's pretty, I think, convenient. And if you want to apply, you could go to the Fayetteville website, and there's an online application you'd fill out to do that. We incur some expenses with our programs, and we don't have a budget at all, so we put a little basket at the back there that we can put money in if you want to help pay for some of the expenses, like labels for plants, little awards, brochures. Cindy's had some brochures made, and we've collected some money toward paying for those, but we haven't collected enough, really. So any money that you feel is worth going toward that effort, you might put a little bit in the basket in the back of the room. There's a sign-up place in the back, and you saw the categories of things. We'll notify you of future events like this if you're interested, and you put your email address and check that you want to be notified back there. There was a place you could be notified. If you have ideas for events and want to help with events, we'll call you and see what you're up to, or you can call us. And then the third category was if you want to help become part of an invasive species removal crew or get involved in that, have people come to your place or whatever. I hope you check that category. Okay, now we get down to the whole point of why you even walked in that door back there. Cindy's here, and Cindi has, as I said, been a 2-term chair of our Tree and Landscape Advisory Committee, and she's on Fayetteville's Environmental Action Committee. She's a master gardener. She's chair of Fayetteville in Bloom, and she spends a whole lot of her time going to schools and teaching people about how to make it comfortable for butterflies to live here, to eat and I guess live. And she also helps get bulbs planted all over town. If you see lots of bulbs now, they're probably because Cindi was behind getting those things planted. Either did it herself or found someone who'd do it. And she's still sore from digging for the bulbs, I'm pretty sure. And in her last few years as a gardener, she directed her own gardening efforts toward creating better habitat, as you can imagine, for birds and insects. And her land now is a certified wildlife habitat, an advanced bird habitat, and a certified Monarch Waystation. And tonight she's going to tell us what motivated her to do all these things and give us some ideas about how we might do these things too if we want to. So this is Cindi Cope.
Just a couple quick things before I get started with the program. It's hard to find native plants in the area. Mary Ann King sells native plants, and I have a whole supply of her catalogs from last year. This is like a book by itself because they have all kinds of pictures of whether it's bird-friendly, butterfly-friendly. The Botanical Garden is having a plant sale. I believe it's April 29th and 30th. Mary Ann will be there. If there's something that you want, email or call her, and she'll bring it up to you. There's also a native plant sale at Peel House Mansion, and I'm getting the final information on those dates and what plants will be for sale, and we'll get that out by email. A friend and I developed this brochure, and it gives some plants that I don't cover in the particular program, and I hope to do another one soon with grasses and flowers. I find it amazing, and I do visit a lot of schools, and they tend to teach about the ecosystem in the rainforest. They learn so little about the ecosystem in the Ozarks and why native plants are important. And let me just say, I am not a purist. I'm not telling you to take out everything that's alien. But even if we only do 5 or 10 plants, we can make a real difference. I moved to Fayetteville 20 years ago. I was a very novice gardener. I got into daylilies. They don't really provide any kind of habitat. But I was at a plant symposium, and they had a sample copy of this book, Bringing Nature Home by Dr. Douglas Tallamay. It changed my life. I read it before I got home from the symposium, and I've been fortunate enough to have Dr. Tallamay come and talk twice, and really has changed how I view. Okay, sustainability is a process that can be maintained indefinitely. I'll go through all this for you, but it provides for the needs of the present without damaging the ability of future generations. I'm going to jump around here a little bit, but I'll start making sense. Biodiversity, they used to call it natural heritage. We have a diversity among the human race. Some of us have red hair, some of us have blue eyes, some of us have brown hair. But that's part of the diversity. There's slight changes. So if something happens, a virus, an infection, that it won't, not all people will succumb to it. We need the same kind of genetic diversity among animals. So even with a butterfly, there might be some slight differences that'll help it survive. I find it amazing. Humans relied on 7,000 species of plants for food. Now, 90% of our diet comes from 20 plants. Walk into the produce department, and we're all eating basically the same plant. Okay, the largest biomass on Earth belongs to the green plants, the algae, the plankton, and these are the sugar makers. Herbivores are a group of animals, and they're primarily insects that directly consume these plants. They are able to turn the sugar into protein, and this is really what's needed for a lot of the birds, bees, butterflies, insects. And of course, we can be meat eaters or we can eat both. So why do we need insects? If I had a pound of beef and a pound of insects, there is more protein in the pound of insects than in the pound of beef. And we need that. The insects need that, the birds need it in order to successfully reproduce. 37% of the animal species are herbivores that are in turn food for the other animals. Insects are also pollinators. 70% of our food must be pollinated. 95% of the insects are beneficial. They're decomposers. I was lucky enough to go to the Super Bowl or Sugar Bowl and in New Orleans, and Audubon has an insectarium. Most people want to be on Bourbon Street. I go to the insectarium. But they had a sign that talked about dung beetles, and you don't think about this, but think of where we raise the cattle. We need those beetles in order to eat the dung so it doesn't pile up. We need them. 90% of life forms are insects. We have already seen that there's been a 50% reduction in the bird population. And think about it. When I was younger, there were so many birds, and you just don't see a lot of birds. The World Conservation Union reports that 12% of all bird species are threatened with extinction. Well, and why do we need birds? They also pollinate. Talked a little bit before about decomposers, but it's bacteria, millipedes. They're the ones that go into the forest and they eat the fallen tree so that it eventually is gone and turns into other nutrients. Okay, bees are the main pollinators. About a year or so ago, and this is a picture of an apple tree, I was talking to the president of a local company, very smart man, and I got on my soapbox and was talking about this. That, we've already lost a large percentage of our bee population. So I was talking about the apple tree. I said, man can't pollinate an apple tree. And he looked at me like I was absolutely crazy. He said, man can't pollinate? How does man pollinate a great big old huge apple tree? You need every flower to be pollinated to produce fruit. There are about 20,000 species of bees. We've heard about colony collapse disorder. They also think it could be stress because they move the bees across country to pollinate various crops. It could be a pesticide. Could be a mite. We're not sure why they're disappearing. And here are just some foods that need to be pollinated. Now, I talk to a lot of school groups. So I always like to point out tomatoes. Do you like tomatoes? And they usually go, ew. I say, okay, now, what about ketchup? Ketchup comes from tomatoes. Pizza sauce, spaghetti sauce. Think of a world without ketchup. And then they start getting it and understanding. Go to the produce department and walk around. Almost everything in produce has to be pollinated. Janet Carson, she's the head of the Master Gardeners in the state. She writes a column for the Democrat Gazette on Saturday mornings. At least 3 times in the last year or so, somebody wrote in, I have a zucchini, I have a cucumber. It has flowers, but it never produces fruit. Pollination. There's not an insect or a bird that will pollinate. And there's lots of other pollinators, butterflies, moths, flies, birds, hummingbirds, mammals. A lot of these are not direct pollinators, but a bird might land on a flower to grab an insect and get some of the pollen on its feet or its beak, and then it flies off to get another insect and transfer the pollen. But they're still pollinators. We tend to think that humans can eat just about anything. And if we can eat all this variety of food, then so can the birds and the insects and the other critters. And that's not true. One of the other things I want to mention, back in 1850, there was one library in the state of Arkansas in Little Rock, and it had 250 books. So people did not pass information along through books. It was from word of mouth, and if you didn't pay attention, you could die. For example, black cherry leaves, pokeweed leaves. I know there's a way you can cook poke. I think you have to cook it and change the water like 3 times. I'm not going to try it. The original lima beans had a lethal dose of cyanide. I still think they do, but that's me. We can eat cucumbers, but we can't eat the leaves. If we would happen to eat an oak leaf, and obviously people did, to get this passed along, but there is a tannin where if we ate it, we would not be able to absorb protein, and we would die of starvation. Okay, so why can't insects eat the alien plants? And that's what Dr. Talame likes to call plants that come from Japan or China or Asia or someplace. The plants and the insects have evolved here over thousands and thousands of years. So you just can't plant something new and expect the insects to eat it. They have to eat something that they can actually digest. I did it as a gardener too. There was a period of time where we didn't like holes in our leaves. And so the nursery industry did what we asked, and they would buy us plants, say a Japanese maple, and the insects wouldn't eat it. So that has brought so many of these invasives that Don Steincross talked about last week or last month, and that we're going to start removing in another month. In fact, Don and I are putting together a special brochure on invasive species. But there's no insects that can eat these plants. So the honeysuckle, the kudzu, multiflora rose, they've escaped. And there's nothing to keep it in check. In China, there are insects that will keep kudzu in check. But that's not a good idea, bringing over a foreign insect. And kudzu. This is what's happened because there's nothing to eat it. There's no real benefit. Just along the same lines, and I'll go through this quickly, but there are foods that we can eat, so we think, well, why can't we just slip our little dog some food? Grapes and raisins can kill, macadamia nuts, sugar substitutes, Baby food may contain onion powder. Cat food is too high in protein for dogs. Fruits like apples, peaches, and cherries, but the pits contain cyanide. Okay, this is my favorite. And you like my scarf? It's a Monarch. Okay. And Dr. Roth is in the audience, so if I say something really stupid, you correct me. He's a retired entomologist from the University of Delaware and a colleague of Doug Talamay, and has spoken sometimes for Ollie and other groups. The size of the monarch egg is about the size of a period at the end of a sentence. The female butterflies have taste sensors in their feet. So they fly around, they land on a plant, and they go, that's not good, I can't lay an egg. Because the egg is so small, the caterpillar, there's no way when it emerges can get to the right plant. It has to be on the right plant. They have a new system in the schools today. It's called Elmo. It's kind of a hybrid of an overhead projector hooked up to a PowerPoint equipment. I was at St. Joe's school, and I usually don't like to pick eggs because the leaf dries out. We watched it. The first graders watched it as a caterpillar emerged from that egg. Amazing. So it's very little. The caterpillar is more like the size of an eyelash. And all it does is eat and poop and eat and poop and eat and poop. If you ate as much as a monarch caterpillar, you would be the size of a school bus. And the only food that they can eat is milkweed, Asclepias. We used to see this growing along the roadsides. Now we mow it down. Now we pave over it. Your grandchildren, maybe your grandchildren's children, will never see a monarch butterfly because we don't plant it. It's not the prettiest plant, and you get these creeping-looking creatures on it. I was at Westwood one day, and they had the milkweed, and I've gotten to know a lot of the employees there, and she said, yeah, this one woman came in, and she thought she was doing a favor for us. She picked up all the caterpillars and threw them on the ground. So she got back as many as she could. Now, this is one of the other things that I will tell you about native plants. I have tried and tried the native milkweed. I like to plant, it's a tropical milkweed, Asclepias curassavica. And it's native to them. It grows in Texas and Mexico, where they fly. I brought 10,000 seeds of milkweed curassavica. They're at the back. There's some envelopes. Help yourself. Plant some, or go to Westwood. I think White River will be selling the grown plants. But help just by planting a couple. And again, if you have grandkids, it's the most amazing thing to show them the egg and to show the caterpillar. So just because it's not native doesn't mean that it's not a good plant, and you have to know kind of what works. This is how children learn about metamorphosis. And I know there's a couple teachers in the audience, a principal and a teacher. They don't get it from these charts. It's not real. For about 7-8 years, I take my larva, I go into classrooms, I have bought a ton of those bug boxes, a ton of the plants, and I give a talk on the monarch butterfly, and then I leave it all there, and the kids can watch them eat and poop. You can almost literally watch them grow, and then they form the chrysalis. Now, I know the monarch chrysalis turns completely liquid, And I don't think it's totally known, but I think there's some buds that have not developed that make it form the wings and other things. But if you were to drop the chrysalis on the ground, it would just be green goo. So it usually crawls off someplace. So basically the butterfly is all scrunched up in that chrysalis, and it opens it up usually with the leg, and the wings are all folded. The abdomen is filled with fluids, and it takes 2 hours to inflate the wings and let them dry before you can release them. And these kids, they name their caterpillars, they name their butterflies. We'll go in the fall, and we actually put little tags on them through Monarch Watch. And if they're found in Mexico, we'll be notified. The monarch is unusual because it overwinters in Mexico. So first off, it's losing the milkweed here that it needs to eat, but the fir forests are being damaged and torn down, so it has no place to overwinter. One of the other things that's really interesting about monarchs, the milkweed has a toxin. So if a bird would eat the caterpillar or the butterfly, it would not die, but it would get very sick. In fact, I don't have a picture of the viceroy, but the viceroy butterfly over, again, hundreds and thousands of years, learned to mimic the monarch, because once the bird would eat a monarch, I'm never going to eat one of those again. Here's another favorite one that I like to grow. I also brought some bronze fennel seeds that are back there. This is the host for the black swallowtail. Also parsley is the host. A lot of these have different defense mechanisms. This guy, the caterpillar, if you make him mad, I can tap him on the head, I can make him mad, and these fake horns come out. So again, a bird is thinking, ew, this could be a snake. Maybe I shouldn't tangle with this one. If you make them really, really mad, it sends out a horrible odor that you can't wash off your hands for a while. I don't think these are going to be around very much longer. Spicebush Butterfly. You can't buy Spicebush. There's one vendor at the farmer's market, and he occasionally has some. I think it's Mark Corley. And he does have some and requests them. Now, these look like eyes. Those are not eyes. Those are fake eye spots. And again, kind of the defense is a bird sees and goes, you know, it could be a tree snake. Passion flower or maypop, host of the Gulf fritillary. Now, I raised some of these plants, and I haven't seen the caterpillar, so I'm trying. This was just kind of a side note when I was doing some research. A walking stick insect can lay unfertilized eggs that turn into clones. Isn't that amazing? And of course, it blends right into a plant. Here's a Penstemon, pretty common plant you can find most anywhere. It's really not a host to any butterfly, but bumblebees, moths, hummingbirds, rodents will all visit the plant. The rodents will eat the seeds that fall on the ground, and then the screech owls will eat the rodents. So it's a real circle of life. A bluebird. They primarily eat insects. And again, we've lost so many insects. But beetles, caterpillars, flies, moths, mealworms. Some of my friends, when I talk about eating caterpillars, they get really upset with me. A cardinal has a little more wide variety. But again, they need the insects. But they will eat blackberry, grapes, holly, the robin, worms, some seeds, some fruits. A purple martin can eat 1,000 insects a day. a house wren. She needs 500 insects a day to successfully reproduce and feed her young. Hummingbirds, we tend to think they only like nectar, but they also eat insects, catch them in the air. Another one of my favorite plants, it's a crocosmia. It's a bulb from South Africa. But it has all kinds of little flowers, and the hummingbirds absolutely love it, and it comes in red. So watch and plant what actually is working. Okay, fish. Juvenile fish eat aquatic insects. I've worked with several schools in the area. There's a program through Keep Arkansas Beautiful called Litter-Free Zone. So each school gets a 2-gallon bucket or container of water. We always go out on campus and look for trash. You would not believe the trash on campuses. On elementary schools, we can always find a cigarette butt. Leonard Elementary, over by the university. Now that the university is smoke-free, where do you think the students are going to smoke? And we're trying to do some work with the university and the school. So anyway, we always find a cigarette butt. We put it in the 2 gallons of water. 1 cigarette butt, 2 gallons of water, within 24 hours forms a toxic solution that kills 80% of the aquatic life. Think about bikes, blues, and barbecue. Think about those cigarette butts that go into the storm sewers. And this is where a lot of people don't understand either. They think that, it goes to the wastewater treatment plant. It goes directly into our creeks. Rainbow trout, they need insects too. Catfish, they eat insects. Bats, a bat can eat 3,000 insects in an evening. And I know you've already heard about there's a white fungus disease and they're closing up bat caves. So we've lost half of our birds. We're losing a lot of our bees. We're losing our bats. We're running out of pollinators. And if we don't start doing some things, we're going to run out of food. And I usually don't say that strongly to the kids, but you're old enough. But most of them eat insects. And only 3 sustain themselves with blood, and they all live in South America. So you don't have to worry about them. Frog, same thing. The little tadpole eats plant material, and then the frogs are carnivores, so they're looking for the insects and the small fish. Turtle, basically the same thing. So what we're doing, we certainly have grass, we certainly have algae, but somehow we're missing this primary consumer anymore. You don't see the grasshoppers. You don't always see the mosquito larvae. So we're losing that part of the food chain. And one of the things I always tell the kid, one picture is grass, one is a tree. Which one is going to take in more CO2? And that's another big reason we need plants. Grass has very little value, but planting a tree has a lot more value. I don't want to get into controversial subject here, but Fayetteville just passed a streamside ordinance, and EAC was part of that. And what we're trying to do is reduce the fertilizers and the pesticides from getting into the creeks and the streams and eventually the lake. And what happens, and this is one of my pet peeves, we have all these services and they come around and they spray fertilizer, pesticide, whether you need it or not. They come by like once a month. And they put signs in your yard saying, don't let your pet or children walk on it for 24 hours or until it's dry. What are we doing? So the other thing we can do is plant the trees near the creeks and rivers and create a riparian zone. There was just a major restoration at Gully Park in the last, 18 months, and they planted 4,000 native plants. And I haven't been over to see it. But it's more expensive to go in and restore and drag in these huge rocks and dirt and all these plants than to take care of it right now, because the pesticide and the fertilizers will go down into the soil and tend to stay there a lot longer and not get directly into the water. You can use a rain garden. I have a rain garden in my own yard with lots and lots and lots of natives, and the wildlife has just been incredible since I put that in. Not a real good picture of a rain garden, but basically you want a spot, and this is a misconception, that the water will stand but be gone within 24 to 48 hours, because then mosquito larvae form. So you don't want the retention or detention pond, because that's where the mosquitoes are going to come from. So how are some of the things that you can do to help? Well, one is integrated pest management. Let's say you have a spider, a fly in your house. You don't need to run out and spray pesticide all over the place. Swat it, take it outside, whatever. The least amount that you have to do. Incorporate some native plants, and I'm going to give you some pictures of some. Even if you just have one little corner of your yard where you keep some leaves for the insects to burrow in or the other animals to hide themselves, that can help. Plant host plants for the butterflies. Plant food sources for the birds. And a lot of these, they're going to eat directly off the plant. I bought elderberry from Mark last year, and there were so many berries, and they're gone, absolutely gone. Try to protect the watershed, providing some nesting areas. Evergreens are always good. Dead trees, even just a few branches, can provide a cover where they can dig a hole, a snag, and protect themselves. As Nancy said, I'm a certified Monarch Waystation, certified wildlife habitat. There are some pros there about the certification process. It's not that hard. You need some evergreens, you need some mature trees, some shrubs. The hardest is a water source. And with that, you can get a bird bath. My children made so much fun of me at Thanksgiving because I bought a heated bird bath. The birds love it. They like it. Okay, what to do with some of these invasives? Here the temptation is to spray with pesticide. I use a little bit tamer method. If you get a bucket of water, put some dishwater soap in it, and so it's nice and foamy, you tap them. Their defense mechanism is to drop down. And they drowned. And there's such joy in drowning 100 or more Japanese beetles. I've gone out already, barehanded, and they are on my roses, 10 of them. I just grab them by the handful and dump them. Okay, this is a soapbox. Whenever you see CIDE at the end of a word, it means to kill. Unfortunately, the pesticide can't read, and it's going to kill the beneficials along with the ones that we don't want, like the Japanese beetles. And I'm just going to pull a couple off. Go to Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's, whatever, and look at some of these labels. Kills over 180 different insects. The label says highly toxic to aquatic life. So again, we have these services that are spraying, or we do it. We get a rainstorm, and that toxin goes into the creek. Here's another one, Orthonex. The label says highly toxic to fish, not for use on houseplants, so you don't want to bring it inside. Do not allow pets and children to come in contact. What are we doing to our children and our grandchildren by using some of these products? This is a systemic, which means it goes up into the branches, and so if an insect is trying to eat the leaves, it can kill the insect that way as well. 7, again, highly toxic to aquatic life. Okay, these are some suggestions. Bird feeders with roots. Plant a variety of plants. I like to leave my garden kind of messy in the fall and leave the seed heads. And golden finches will land on my echinacea, and they'll eat the seeds. Or the mourning doves gather around the garden, and they're more ground feeders, so they'll eat on the ground. So a little messy is okay. One of my favorites, Beautyberry. Isn't this a gorgeous native, and it comes in several different colors? It provides early nectar and pollen. It should start blooming almost any day now. And then these beautiful berries form. And guess what? The birds eat the berries. These are hard to come by. Again, Mark at the farmer's market will have some. I think White River will have some. The other thing that we need to do is to go into some of the other nurseries, like a Westwood, and say, I want to buy this plant, and get them to order it. Wildflowers. As part of Fayetteville in Bloom, we've been sowing wildflower seeds along the trail system. And it's amazing what just a few wildflower seeds can do. Not only nectar, pollen, but the seed heads provide food. Sunflowers. I also brought some sunflower seeds. And it's wonderful to watch these sunflowers growing, and then the birds land on top, and they lean over, and they're eating the seeds. And then some of them fall to the ground, and I just let them grow too. Zinnias. Here again, it's not a native, but it provides, they flower a lot, providing the nectar and the pollen and the seeds. Echinacea, one of my favorites. They will eat the seed on the center. One thing that I have to caution you on, there's a lot of new echinaceas that are coming out that are absolutely gorgeous. There's pink and yellow and an orange tomato soup. But they're grown in a culture, a tissue culture, and the seeds are sterile. So there's no nutritional value. I'm not saying don't plant them, because I certainly do. But just know that you can cut those back, because they're not going to provide any nutritional support. Milkweed. Please, 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 if you do nothing else. If you live on an apartment patio, put it in a pot and grow it. And it will attract all kinds of insects to the flowers. Spicebush. Now, you can get sassafras. I know you can order sassafras from White River. And if you know anybody who has some land, they'll usually tell you they've got some sassafras. But, I mean, it provides not just for the butterflies, but for the rabbits and the raccoon, the opossum, game birds. It's important to have some evergreen trees, however you do that. The seeds of the pine cone provide food, and it's shelter. It's very important shelter when there's bad weather. Pawpaw. It's almost impossible to find pawpaws anymore. So you need to look around for them. And this is the host of their tiger swallowtail. People ate the pawpaws, and they still do, if you can find them. Kind of tastes like a banana, from what I'm told. A side note, the Native Americans, and we don't give them enough credit for being as smart as they were and learning the land. but there are seeds inside the pawpaw. And if they would chew the seeds and then throw them into the stream or the lake, and there's a stupefying agent that makes the fish go a little numb, and they could catch them a lot easier. I mean, how brilliant is that? How do you figure that out? I love the redbuds, and they're just starting to bloom. Again, observe when it's a nice warm day, and if you've got the forsythia blooming or the redbud, you're going to see insects nectaring there. And it's a good source, and they need the pollen and the nectar, and then they have wonderful seed pods in the fall for food. Crabapple, we're not going to eat the crabapple, but the birds sure like it. One of my favorites, viburnums of almost any kind. Just stay clear of anything, you know, that says like Korean or a foreign country. It's an alien, and it's not going to be as good. But again, in the forms, it has the nectar and the pollen, and then these wonderful berries that are eaten by all kinds of critters. Chokecherry, not something we're really going to eat either, but it's a host plant to a butterfly. I can't tell you which one right now, but the birds will eat the berries. Mahonia. Now, this actually comes from Oregon, but it works here. The berries form, and they're eaten. So again, you know, sometimes I hear people talk about, well, we shouldn't plant anything. It's not native unless it was here in 1850. It's been 160 years. Things have changed. I heard Joe Neal speak. He's a big birder. And one of his comments, he kept saying, and this bird has never been in our area before. So the birds are moving. The climate has changed, whether you believe in global warming or not. So again, you watch something, see if it works. Dogwoods, wonderful. And those red berries are great for animals. And again, people get a little upset. You know, we have prey and predators, and the bird's going to eat some of those caterpillars. Certainly, mosquitoes have no problem with that. And most of you realize that we almost lost the bald eagle, and that was due to pesticides. And they would eat the animals, and they nearly died. But there again, we need them. We need some of these predators who will eat the roadkill. And it would be a really messy world if we didn't have them out there. Hawks, same thing. Here are some native plants. And I just want to take a couple of minutes how some of these plants were used by the Native Americans or by the early settlers. As late as World War II, people were paid to go get these milkweed seed pods because they're very, very fluffy, and they were used in flotation devices. Russia sent people out to find dandelion seeds or plants because there's a latex in the dandelion leaves that was used for rubber in World War II. We didn't grow coffee here. We didn't grow tea, so people had to use other things. So they would make a tea from the milkweed. Echinacea, I mean, it's still used today. You can go into any drugstore and get that. Bloodroot, you can't see it from the picture, but the root is a very, very deep red. People had to use plants in all kinds of different ways. So the Native Americans and early settlers also used it to dye cloth, pottery, and make war paint. They thought it was useful for bronchitis. And I think I'd like some. Again, dandelion was used for digestive disorders. I haven't tried it, and I don't think I will, but if you get the young new leaves, that was used in salads. Passion flower or maypop, it was a sedative. It's a plant, host plant for the Gulf fritillary. The fruit is edible. people had to know, and again, they did have libraries, so they passed this around, so they had to know where they could find some of these plants and when the food would ripe before the other animals got to it. Yarrow. This has been used since ancient times. It was used in the Civil War, and people were paid to go pick it. Because one of the most dangerous things in the Civil Wars, we didn't have penicillin. They needed something to cover the wounds so they would not get infected. And that's how a lot of people died, is they'd be infected. So you pack yarrow in the wound, and somehow it helps to stop the bleeding. And here are just the sources of a few native plants. Pine Ridge, and again, Botanical Garden, April 29th and 30th. You can buy wildflower seeds. There's Holland Wildflower Farm. Between the Rivers, Joanne Soren comes from Eureka Springs. She has some, and there's other vendors at the farmer's market. So, any questions? Okay, the question was, is milkweed a perennial? There are two varieties. I have planted the perennial milkweed. I've never seen a monarch on it. And trust me, I stop along the roadside going up to Beaver Lake, and I go look for it, and I rarely see. I think the leaves of the seed that I brought are more tender, and they do seem to like it better. And I'll find like 100 on my plants.
And that's an annual, isn't it?
It's an annual, but you can also save the seed from the seed pod and start it up again. Okay, any other questions? Yes?
The seeds fallen, will they go ahead and come up the next year then?
It's too cold here. They tend to freeze. You might get a volunteer plant later in the summer, but so if you just again save the seed, get a seed pod, put it in a baggie, and save it for use next year.
How much sun do they need?
They will say, the books will say full sun. What you have to understand is we live in Arkansas. When they say full sun, they mean Minnesota or Wisconsin. So if it gets about 6 hours of sun, that is going to be plenty for most any plant. Another question?
I gathered my seeds from my tropical milkweed last year. When should I pull them?
Right now. Right now. And the sooner the better. The monarchs are just beginning to start their migration back from Mexico. This is about the 4th generation from last spring. So, and this is something I don't tell kids either, but the monarchs don't sexually mature until they start coming back because it helps conserve energy. So they're looking for places to lay their eggs. So the sooner that we can get some milkweed out, we'll have some. And then they will eventually this group will start dying off, and then the children will go further into Canada and across the country. On a really weird side note, you have monarchs east of the Rockies, and you have monarchs west of the Rockies. The monarchs west of the Rockies, if you ordered some, like some people like to have them given away, let them fly off at like a wedding or a funeral, if they came from California, they would never find their way to Mexico. It's somehow genetically wired. But the sooner you can plant, the better, and then it'll be about the 4th generation that will head south. And we start getting them, a lot of them, in August and September. And they're laying their eggs and heading on to Mexico. But again, if you haven't picked up one of Marianne King's books, this is just wonderful and will give you a lot of information. I strongly recommend Bringing Nature Home. Great book, a lot of science in it, but it really is a fascinating read. And get some seeds and start them. That is very hard to find and expensive. Where do you find Trillium? And you've got to be really careful where you go. But there's a lot of unscrupulous people out there, and they go into the woods and they dig this stuff up, and then they sell it. So you need to be a little careful. But it also pays to do a little bit of research, so they're not just pulled. I'll be doing a talk at Devil's Den and on wildflowers, and I'm sure that is a huge problem. People go out there and get a little shovel and take them home. And it is against state law to take them from highways, and I'm sure parked as well.
I was wondering if Doug Tallamy is going to come back again.
I haven't arranged anything yet. I know he is going to be in the Little Rock and possibly Conway the end of September. Doug Tallamy, who wrote Bringing Nature Home, and I'm hoping to bring the American in Bloom Symposium here in 2012, and I would love to have him as a keynote speaker.